The burdens for Canadians is tougher than ever, whether it comes from the government or whether it comes from bad decisions. We need to look at that and look at how we are spending the money or whether we can make more. And that's where real estate comes in as a powerful leverage tool for each and every Canadian, not just as shelter, but also for your financial future. So you may be asking, why are so many Canadians going bankrupt right now? Number one, we have to understand what has happened in the time since the pandemic. Obviously, it makes sense. During the pandemic, a lot of people weren't making income, weren't going to work, they weren't getting any income. Then, of course, a lot of people were able to survive because of the CERB checks that everyone got. But right now, Canadians that are going bankrupt, the vast majority of them are in the middle class. These are people who have homes that really are their largest source of debt. We're talking real estate across the country where Canadians have bought homes. If they bought homes in the last number of years during the pandemic, as it rose, a lot of us have seen as inflation has continued to carry up, and we've seen it in different places. We've seen it with people's mortgages. We've seen it with rent. We've seen it with food. We've seen it with gas. Add all of these things together, and we are seeing an unprecedented number of Canadians declaring bankruptcy right now, more than during the pandemic. We are seeing them bleed because you have to start choosing, where do I spend what money I've got? Do I eat? Do I pay this bill? Do I pay that bill? And Canadians are trying to figure it out. And the numbers are showing that more and more Canadians aren't able to figure it out. There are approximately over 340 bankruptcies declared every day in the province of Saskatchewan. I believe the national average right now is close to 400 filings a day. And just this month, there are over 12,000 bankruptcy filings. What happens in a bankruptcy? People are trying to get their debts written off. They just can't pay it anymore. And how do those debts get so high? It's because they're having to take on new debt to try to maintain their lifestyle. Now, obviously, there are a lot of people that, you know what, they need to sell that nice car. They need to get rid of a boat. They need to get rid of some of these luxuries that they just flat out can't afford. But with this many Canadians, we need to be able to see that these are regular Canadians that are not able to afford the cost of living right now. And the majority cost, the highest portion for all Canadians, is their housing expense. And their housing expenses, if you own, has been directly related to interest rates. If you rent, it's been directly related to immigration, as there's been more and more pressure for renters. For homeowners, the greater pressure has been interest rates. Now, what are we seeing in the marketplace right now? We're seeing more and more Canadians that have been bleeding trying to sell. What people are willing to offer them is less in many cases than what they paid for it just a couple of years ago. And as a result, they cannot afford to sell their homes. They can't afford to go somewhere else. And we are seeing this more and more across the country. So what we're seeing are Canadians trying to figure out, how do I balance this bill? Now, their bills. And you've seen, and I've seen, the more and more tent cities that have gone up across the country. Absolutely in Vancouver, in BC, absolutely in Toronto, in Ontario. But they are going up across the country. And that is people who are literally saying, I guess I'll live nowhere because I can't afford to live where I was living, or the availability just isn't there. So people are literally opting out. The number of people that have moved overseas, have gone down to places like Mexico, has increased rapidly, so much so that the Canadian government increased the cost to leave the country. If you want to leave Canada for good, you're going to have to pay even more money now as a result. This is what the Canadian government has done to even try to stop you from leaving the country because you can't afford it here. So, what is really going on there with the finances? In many cases, people have lines of credit, they've got their credit cards and different personal loans, and they can't get out from under it. So, if you find yourself in this position, one of the things you can do is use private lending, use private mortgages to be able to refinance that debt. It's a way for Canadians to be able to get out of some of the high interest rate credit lines, credit cards, where you're paying 22, 29, or heaven forbid, you are using some of those really expensive high interest rate personal loans that are out there that are in the 30s and 40% range. If you are a homeowner, there are ways to be able to restructure. You don't have to go bankrupt. And this is a tool for Canadians to be able to hold out, not having to sell their home. Is it the best case scenario? I don't know. That's a great question. But there are options for Canadians to be able to get themselves out of debt. If that's of interest, you know how to get a hold of me. What's really important for us to see as it comes to real estate is to understand that people that have real estate have some of those options. If you are below that and you don't own, you rent, and you don't have those assets, then a couple of things happen. Number one, people that are below that marker tend to have less liabilities, but there's also less income in many of those cases. But the liabilities are the ones that are affecting these people. These are people, if you're one of the 12,000, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The liabilities are what is weighing you down. If you're in the poor section of our socioeconomic category, what you're going to find is the bigger issue is there's not enough income, which results in making it hard to pay rent, makes it difficult to pay food and afford some of these basic necessities. And there isn't the leverage. This is a result of the financial and fiscal policies of this government, and it's putting pressure on all Canadians. But if you're Canadian with real estate, you have some leverage in this market.
When the ones around trusting their word, they walk the talk in the world of investment, they make their mark.